Good afternoon, everybody. I am Steve Nason, Research Director at Parks Associates. I oversee our entertainment research practice, and I am so pleased today to be joined by Matt Smith, VP of Business Development at Symphony Media AI. How are we doing today, Matt?
Doing great. Thanks for having me today. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Before we dive into our proper conversation, maybe you can just let everyone know about Symphony Media AI and also your role there.
Sure. So we're a 30-year-old company with a history of working with media entertainment data. We work on behalf of the content provider to measure how and when and where their content is played and ensure the proper compensation. And we're also providing a variety of new SaaS tools that measure and predict revenue, audience behaviors, insights, and even churn mitigation. Personally, I look after Reviti Engage, which is our audience and content insight solution. I help content providers to see how the audience is interacting with content and analyze when subscribers may be at risk for churning and help to prescriptively address that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All the metrics that you mentioned, retention, content engagement, obviously churn is a big term in the industry. So we're going to dive into some of that now. But I want to just take a step back as we kind of start our conversation. Let's look back maybe 3 to 5 years. And from your perspective, how has the market, the media and entertainment, connected entertainment space kind of changed over that time? What trends have you been following? What have you kind of noticed, both from an industry and consumer standpoint?
Yeah, being an old school video guy, I've been working in the coal mine for a long time. So most striking to me is the impact of AI and ML. So this is exciting because it's transforming how we define insight in terms of the depth, the scale, the quality, and also really exploring the unknown. You think about it, one thing ML or machine learning can do that humans can't is answering questions that humans don't think to ask. So, for example, we're working with a big media brand, and we engaged with them, looked at their data, and the algorithm detected 15,000 subscribers who had no expiration date, and that tabulated into about $1 million in revenue. So that was something that we didn't ask the algorithm to look for. It found it on its own, and that's pretty striking. You know, AI is the thinking and the learning of computer platforms or machines, incorporating human intelligence into the machines and computers. To be more specific, it's the computer platforms and the machines that are taking in data and learning from that data, making decisions from that data to achieve a goal and complete a task. So for media entertainment companies, this really means providing invaluable analysis of their platform data with insight into every aspect of their business, from the authorization to the payment gateway, content affinity to user preference and outcome probability based on a variety of factors. So in layman's terms, though, that sounds a bit high-minded, but we're really using the machines and the trained algorithms to really analyze every aspect of a video offering. That's what's really neat to me.
Yeah, really interesting. And maybe you can kind of talk about the role of technology and data and how it's kind of evolved from where it came to where it was. You kind of mentioned some of the use cases, but and you mentioned, in general terms, kind of what AI and ML brings to the table. But maybe you kind of dig a little deeper into that and really what does this next generation of, let's call it smart data, what does it really bring for your clients and others in the space?
Yeah, to go a little deeper on ML, it's a component of AI. Machine learning provides the computer systems with the structure to learn, the algorithms, if you will. So the algorithms are used to gather the data, analyze it. The machine learning needs the assistance from humans, programmers and data scientists. So, like recommendations of content based on prior viewing habits. But, the really interesting thing about what AI and ML are doing today are driving things that required a lot of human interaction just not that long ago, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on the different use cases that you're helping your clients, using these techniques, right? As far as customer retention, payment, subscribership, content engagement, all that. Since COVID-19, which has obviously been such a unique point in time, an unprecedented time, obviously. Have you noticed that your clients' needs have changed? Have they kind of shifted towards one use case over another? Are they focusing in one area that you're helping them with?
Well, it really varies by the provider themselves, right? And their business model, right? There's a lot
Right.
of different models. There's AVOD, there's SVOD. We have one example I'll give you is I recently engaged with a customer who had a very long trial period, 14 days. And some of these viewers, especially coming out of the pandemic, may have a lot more time on their hands, and frankly, they were seeing a trend where a big swath of users were going in and binging every episode of one show and then just jumping off the platform. So, a small little nugget of advice I could offer here to the audience. So, if you are a programmer and you're using a trial method to obtain those subscribers, think carefully about where and how you place the content, how you're going to monetize it or charge for it, what the payment gateway looks like relative to how long a subscriber has to consume that content. You want them to engage with your platform for a piece of content or different pieces of content, but give them a reason to stick around too.
Right, absolutely. Well said. So to kind of conclude our conversation today, let's kind of spin it forward. Let's look over the next year or two, and where do you kind of see the use of data, especially as I'm calling it smart data, kind of evolve from here, and especially as you use it to help clients in this space?
Yeah, consumer choices have really shaped how we create, deliver, manage, and measure content of all types. If you think about the fragmented distribution landscape, it now requires really unexpected functions. Legal and accounting teams now, believe it or not, have to have complex tools to manage their workflows and their businesses. And then even further, the complex monetization landscape now requires more complex and intelligent tool sets to establish and manage a variety of models. We talked about it a second ago, from AVOD to SVOD, from trials to converted subscribers. So the changes in windowing meaning where instead of it being, there's a date between theater and when it's available in your living room, that's compressed a bit. And bundling is really further stretching out the teams and the tools and really the business itself too. So I still wonder, as I look forward too, I wonder if short form content has a distinctive future. So if any of us have watched teenagers, TikTok is the main go-to for them. But conversely, the crash and burn of Quibi gives me pause. So I don't know if a change in content form is one forward path for sure, but we believe that the future of media entertainment viewing will continue to test the provider's ability to think about these things and anticipate and adapt to changing viewer tastes. So we're helping by continuing to build and adapt technology to help them meet these needs. So really, if you're in the audience, ask yourself how prepared you and your team are for that.
Absolutely, and that's a great way to wrap it up. Well, Matt Smith, VP Business Development at Symphony Media AI, thank you again for your time and perspectives today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
If you miss a live session, you can go back at any time to watch on demand. Go to Watch Replays and click on the session that you want to view. Have you created your own event agenda in SwapCard? Visit the Agenda and Watch Replay tabs to add sessions that interest you to your own event. You can go back to My Event to revisit any bookmarked sessions, sponsors, and items. We want to make sure that you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors. You can interact with them by visiting the Booths in the Sponsor tab. You can also bookmark sponsors or add items to your event to view later. Sponsors have uploaded extra materials for attendees. Make sure to visit sponsors that interest you to chat with one of their team members or save documents for later. We have dedicated meeting slots set up for break times between sessions. Continue the discussion by requesting meetings from others in the SwapCard platform. Schedule a meeting with another attendee or a sponsor by visiting their page. The panelists and speakers will be addressing your questions live during the stream. During the stream, use the question tab to ask your questions early in the presentation. Go to the poll tab to answer polls that will be discussed during the live stream. If you need help navigating SwapCard, please reach out to our team by mentioning @Parks Associates in the chat box or by contacting one of our team members via our company page. Welcome to the 4th annual Future of Video OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media, a virtual series taking place across 2021. Consumers and their entertainment choices are the key drivers in the entertainment industry. As more video entertainment options become available, bringing more freedom of choice, consumer preferences will determine their usage patterns and the size and content of their portfolios. Market conditions have also changed the nature of competition in video services. Consumers are willing to carry multiple video accounts to get the content they want, so in many instances, a service is desired based on how it complements other services in the market. At the 4th annual Future of Video, we are bringing together industry leaders to share insights on new trends in the video and connected entertainment industries. Our speakers will present insights on consumer behaviors and the challenges for the video industry in meeting these expectations. Parks Associates analysts will present in-depth consumer and industry research on OTT services, the value of content, and best strategies for building successful video services for today's connected consumers. We hope you can join us for these upcoming sessions or watch replays of any past sessions. On March 31st, join us for Evolution of VMVPDs Finding Success. On May 5th, we will dive into Beyond the Theater, New Windowing Strategies. We have 2 sessions on June 9th covering retention and churn in OTT and data and decision-making in video services. On July 28th, join us for the impact of connected devices on the video experience. On October 6th, impact of 5G on consumer entertainment. Finally, join us for our 2-day conference on December 14th and 15th for the shift to hybrid business models, the age of video aggregation, capturing the consumer, video engagement and strategies, and OTT bundling partnerships. Thank you for attending Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first session today of 2, Future of Video 2021. In this first session, we'll be focusing on a critical challenge, an issue that faces everyone throughout the video services and digital media ecosystem, and that's retention and churn. We're going to focus mainly on the OTT space while we cover all aspects of the ecosystem. Before we dive into our agenda and our event today, we have to thank our sponsors. Without them, this event would not be possible, and we really appreciate their support. And they are Everise, Symphony Media AI, Delta Tray, Bright Cove, Future Today, BitMovin, and Metrological. Thank you again for your continued support. We also have to thank our supporters, CEDIA, SCTE, the Monitoring Association, Z-Wave Alliance, Avia, and Home Grid Forum. Thank you for all your support. And now to lay out an agenda, what's ahead of us over the next couple hours for this session on retention and churn. After my introduction, I will pass the baton over to Liam Goggin, researcher on my team, who will go over the latest trends and consumer data on retention and churn at OTT. Then I'll have the pleasure of introducing Sebastian Braun from Verimatrix for a visionary insight. Then our president, Elizabeth Parks, will moderate a virtual executive Q&A with Matt Smith from Symphony Media AI. Then I will be back on the virtual stage as I will moderate an interactive panel, Effective Strategies for Retaining Customers. And we'll hear from industry experts from Plex, TiVo, Bitmovin, Real Good, and Zumo. And included in that will be an interactive session Q&A from our audience, as well as some audience polls. Then we'll wrap up this particular session with a networking discussion via Zoom, where our speakers, people from Parks Associates, and you, the audience, will discuss how do you measure churn. This session on retention and churn is part of our 2021 virtual series on Future of Video 2021. It will culminate with a two-day event in December where we'll focus on a variety of topics affecting the video service and digital media ecosystem. By way of introduction, I'm Steve Nason, Research Director from Parks Associates. I oversee our entertainment research practice, covering areas such as video services, pay TV and OTT, consumer electronics devices, mobile, broadband, gaming, and anything else affecting the connected entertainment home. And I'll be your moderator and host for the session today. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Liam Goggin, researcher for our analyst insight on trends in OTT retention and churn. Thank you.
Welcome to Parks Associates Future of Video 2021. I'm Liam Goggin, researcher for entertainment content and services. Today, we'll be discussing some of the key trends in retention and churn for OTT services. The OTT marketplace has grown more crowded with the launch of high-profile new services from major studios and conglomerates. Netflix maintains its market dominance with an average subscription length of 48 months. Netflix's early entry into the OTT market has developed strong brand loyalty among subscribers who see it as an essential service. The past year saw the launch of Viacom CBS's Paramount Plus, Warner Media's HBO Max, NBC Universal's Peacock, and Discovery Incorporated's Discovery Plus. Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus both launched in November 2019, and they continue to grow. These services boast impressive libraries and invest heavily into original content. With a more competitive landscape, viewer retention is a commodity. The big three OTT services, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu, lead in subscriber retention with the longer average subscription lengths. While this can partially be attributed to their establishment within the market, these services have also developed loyalty among subscribers, making them more likely to cancel a newer service that they've only recently adopted. The big three are seen as essential services. Rivals are looking to become a mainstay as they vie for that viewer attention. Of course, long-term viewer retention relies upon users making the decision to subscribe in the first place. OTT was once thought of as a cheaper alternative to traditional pay TV, but now the stacking of multiple service subscriptions has begun to emulate the channel bundling of traditional lean-back television. Given the tight financial constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic, viewers are more selective in choosing to subscribe to a service. 61% of OTT subscribers say they never subscribe to a service on impulse, and 50% say they never subscribe to a service with plans to cancel shortly thereafter. With services like Netflix and Disney Plus dropping their free trials, viewers look for OTT services that are worth a long-term investment. For service providers, this means their content must be appealing enough to generate that renewed interest. 30% of subscribers said they often subscribe to a service to watch a specific program. The search for desirable content continues to hold the utmost importance. vMVPDs experienced an unprecedented level of churn in 2020. The lack of new sports content during the early days of COVID-19 sparked dramatic cancellations. 73% of subscribers canceled their service. We saw a significant shift within the last year, with cancellations down to 39%. The return of live sports content has helped to stabilize the market as more traditional pay TV subscribers migrate to vMVPDs. Users will retain services that they see as valuable. Churn's common among households looking to cut expenses or after the viewing of key original content. 26% of users cite a need to cut household expenses as a trigger for churn, and 26% say they terminate their subscription after completing a series that they enjoyed. We've seen more expensive services, like HBO Max, struggle to convince new subscribers to retain that $14.99 a month subscription fee, particularly if they're not as interested in the regularly produced content. We saw the predecessor HBO Now service attract many new subscribers during the final run of the last season of Game of Thrones, followed by a high number of cancellations after the show concluded. There are many different retention options available for content providers. Users tend to cite flexible pricing options as a motivation for keeping their service. 21% of users reference the ability to pause a subscription, and 21% also cited the availability of the lower price tier. HBO Max recently launched an ad-free supported tier with more limited content at a lower monthly fee of $9.99. For services to retain users beyond that initial interaction, regular content is the necessity. 37% of subscribers to a new OTT service in the last year indicated that they were planning to terminate their subscription because of a lack of new content. High cancellation rates tend to follow the conclusion of high-profile programming, like Game of Thrones. Disney Plus has been able to maintain its initial market impact through the regular premieres of marquee titles, including Lucasfilm's The Mandalorian and Marvel Studios' projects WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. OTT services have aimed to capture prolonged interaction through brand loyalty for the content assets at their disposal. Not only does desirable content from popular franchises and personalities prompt retention, but viewers are unlikely to churn from a service that they have a strong brand affinity for. Warner Media's HBO Max expanded the lineup of HBO shows with marquee properties including DC Entertainment, Turner Classic Movies, Cartoon Network, Sesame Workshop, Studio Ghibli, Adult Swim, and recently produced Max Originals. Warner Media hoped that targeting a wide variety of interest groups would help unify niche audiences under one service. The recently launched Paramount Plus has emulated this strategy. It features its key properties and personalities heavily within the initial marketing campaign that promises a mountain of entertainment. Disney Plus has a slightly different approach. Its content is largely family-friendly. The assets of Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and National Geographic are not only among the most popular properties in entertainment, but they distinguish Disney Plus as their exclusive online home. Disney Plus has leveraged the full extent of programming at its disposal to rise quickly within the OTT ranks and become a real contender to the big three services. Diversified pricing plans for different tiers of a service encourage fluidity among subscribers who risk churning or are unsure about signing up initially. NBC Universal's Peacock offers 3 different pricing plans. There's a free ad-based plan offering limited content, a $4.99 a month ad-based premium plan offering unlimited content, and an ad-free premium plan at $9.99 a month. The different options offer viewers with alternate entrance paths, and the ability to scale down to a lower plan can retain viewers who may have otherwise terminated their subscription altogether. Limited episodes of key shows like The Office are offered at the free plan, with the entire series available for premium subscribers. Other services, like the leading anime service Crunchyroll, offer similar tiered options. With users looking for advantageous price points, bundles are a lucrative retention opportunity. The shared advantages provide bundling partners the ability to target different markets with combined benefits. We've seen many different types of bundles develop. The Netflix on Us bundle with T-Mobile provides access to the service for subscribers to the wireless provider's 2 higher-priced plans. The bundle favors T-Mobile, as the inclusion of the leading OTT service is an advantage that rivals don't offer. However, Netflix retains subscribers to these plans and sets up an opportunity to attract non-subscribers to the service if they sign up for one of T-Mobile's premium options. Spotify's student pricing plan bundles Hulu, Showtime, and the ad-free premium Spotify music service for $4.99 a month, similar in price to a standard Hulu subscription. This bundle specifically targets younger viewers likely to be more prudent with less disposable capital. Music streaming services are popular among these younger audiences, and the bundle offers a perfect gateway to Hulu content. The parameters of the bundle require the educational institution to be verified, so subscribers are more likely to pay for both services individually once their eligibility lapses. We've also seen the bundling of multiple OTT services. A deal that offered Apple TV+, CBS All Access, and Showtime for a monthly price of $9.99 was launched last summer. The bundle was a novelty. Apple TV Plus is priced at $4.99 a month, CBS All Access at $9.99 for its ad-free tier, and Showtime at $10.99. Apple TV Plus earns significant subscriptions within its first year, thanks to an extended promotional period. The small content library risks provoking a major churn rate once the tryout lapsed. Including appealing content from two leading services allows Apple users to get the most of their subscription and prompts them for longer use. This was also a strategic move on the part of Viacom CBS, who was able to introduce CBS All Access content to Apple users prior to the rebranded Paramount Plus launch in March. Conglomerates have also bundled their OTT services together, with the most popular being the Disney bundle of Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and Hulu's ad-supported option for $13.99, or Hulu with no ads for $19.99. The advantageous price point allows Disney to give users access to all three services, even if they're only interested in retaining their subscription to one or two. The deal also markets to different demographics. Disney Plus features family-friendly content, ESPN provides sports coverage, and Hulu features more mature entertainment for adults. For more insights on OTT trends and developments, stick around for a visionary insight discussion with Verimatrix Director of Product Development Sebastian Braun and Parks Associates Research Director Steve Nason.
Liam, thank you for those great insights in that presentation. Really acts as a great table setter for our discussion today, starting as we move right into our visionary insight with Verimatrix. Before I introduce Sebastian, our featured speaker, I just want to give you a couple of reminders. First of all, if you have any questions for Sebastian or anyone else as part of our program today, please put them in the questions tab, which should be on the right of the interface that we're using today. And also we have a couple of poll questions related to retention and churn and OTT that we would love to get your feedback on. We'll go through the results during our panel later on in the session, and we really love to get your feedback on that. But now for our visionary insight, I am pleased to introduce Sebastian Braun, Director of Product Management from Verimatrix. Sebastian is a business and technology leader with extensive experience in digital video delivery, customer journey development, technology partnerships, and new business development. Prior to joining Verimatrix, Sebastian held various product management positions at Rovi and Divix, where he conceived and launched entertainment platforms at scale, created cross-platform consumer video apps, and executed large-scale integrated go-to-market campaigns. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Sebastian and turn over the virtual stage. Please remember to submit any questions for Sebastian. Sebastian, how are we doing today?
Hey, thanks, Steve. Very good. Can
Awesome.
you hear me okay?
Right, turn it over to you for your presentation. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. All right, so maybe thanks for the kind introduction, Steve. Quickly, also a couple of words about Verimatrix. We are known as a digital content protection outfit, leading that space for quite many years, both on the pay TV side and the OTT side. And most recently, we've actually broadened our portfolio with some technology around application shielding and protecting devices themselves. So we're going beyond the content now protecting applications itself and devices, and in turn, really the consumer and the data that is being generated on those platforms that consumers are enjoying content on. So with that, let's go into our presentation here today, really talking about embracing OTT churn. I think, as you heard in Liam's introduction, it's happening. Consumers are turning services on and off, and it's really about keeping up with it and embracing the fact that that is happening. So maybe just a quick thought. This was pretty interesting data here as well. Churn rate by service, and this is focused primarily on SVOD platforms. Obviously, churn can be very different for a service that offers TV shows or movies, or as Liam said as well, a service that offers sports. And during COVID, those have been impacted versus the services that are offering episodic content and movies have seen uptake. Some streaming services it looks like are being hit a little bit more with churn than others. And in my mind, there's this theory developing that content is still king. And if you kind of go down this list, you really see that the lower churn numbers are related to those services that really produce content, own their content, and distribute their content through those platforms. There's other angles, obviously, to churn: quality of experience, involuntary churn, credit card expirations, etc. But at the core, I believe it's still all about the content. And here's a good overview that I found in a Deloitte survey that was pretty eye-opening, and kind of the overall story that this tells here is, if we're looking at the amount of new services added, or per household or per subscriber, I think the numbers are somewhere around, we used to subscribe to 3 services on average. Today we're up to 5 services on average, and that speaks to this incremental fragmentation, I think, that we're seeing in the market. More services, more content owners going direct to consumers. The discovery experience gets fragmented in that way, but that leaves consumers with no choice. If they really want to watch a show, they have to go and sign up for that service where that show is on, unless it's on one of the sort of super aggregator outlets like an Amazon, for example. Another interesting part here I found were the oops, sorry about that. The reasons why subscribers cancel the service, and price sensitivity is obviously one of those. Also interesting, I think, is no surprise there. Content that I liked was being removed, so that's more testament to the content is king. But interesting to me was also to see that quite a few people actually said, hey, I switched to a service that offers more interactive content experiences, and adds more entertainment, not necessarily through the content, but through the overall experience. And the movements in content or switching services is clear there. So with that said, we believe that there's a new subscriber journey that's coming. We're seeing all content creators, content owners going direct to consumer, and yes, it's all about retention. If you have a good content catalog, if you have a seasonal content catalog, the second part of the game also becomes reactivation. And so with that in mind, we think of the churned consumer not necessarily as a consumer that was lost or a subscriber that we'll never get, but now they're a prospect again. And the important part for us here is to try and stay in touch with them, by way of communications tools that we have available. It could be social media, obviously ad buys, email marketing, and so on, targeting, retargeting online, and understand. And in order to do a good job on that reactivation front, we really have to understand more about that consumer, what content got them to our platform in the first place, find relevant linked content that speaks to them, the good theory here is that it's a little bit lower cost to reactivate an existing subscriber than go out and find a completely new subscriber. So really, by embracing churn and sort of the cyclical churn rate based on content availability, the providers can really focus on winning these subscribers back by leveraging first-party data. And that's really the premise here around first-party data. Why first-party data? Why reactivation depends on first-party data? Third-party data is becoming harder to rely on, or also harder to collect, harder to match. We see, I think I just read the uptake of Apple, the iOS 14.5 release with all its new privacy features and ad tracking features. I think about 96% of iPhone users that upgraded to that OS used that or turned that on immediately. So you can see that the ability to collect, cross-app data it's becoming harder and harder. And so really the data that we have to rely on is the data from our services themselves, and also the vendors that are powering those services, whether it be your encoding vendor or your security vendor like Verimatrix. Everybody is sitting on data that is relevant for your business and can help you identify and package up knowledge about the subscriber to drive to reactivation. Another example is, with the Chrome 90 release, the on-off switch for the third-party cookies. So it becomes more and more difficult, and really first-party data is where we need to focus to understand the consumer. Also on OTT, we have, and this is kind of to the point earlier from the Deloitte survey about, looking for more interactive features. So on OTT, unlike pay TV, there's this beauty of this UX revolution that allows us to, test things much more rapidly, roll out small experiments. Maybe not all of your subscribers are seeing certain features, and kind of really see what subscribers respond to. Again, going back, a lot of these experiences and a lot of this UX evolution is driven by real-time data and the maintaining that context that the subscriber is in with that data to keep them engaged. So there's a lot of not necessarily content focused experimentation ongoing, but interactive feature and experience experimentation. And obviously compared to pay TV, it's a lot easier to deploy on OTT platforms and experiment than on a legacy set-top box, for example. So I thought this is fairly recent here. Fubo just released an update, and they're really kind of dipping their toes into like sportsbook features. Starting out with showing stats on the screens, and you can see this is just a few steps away from really kind of engaging with the betting itself, relevant to sports, and so on. Very easy interactive feature that we can envision to add on there. One of the next questions is, for example, an interactive feature on the Friends reunion was watch party. So in that sense, how can real-time data be applied to non-sports events? So real-time data in the sports scenario, you have, odds coming in, you can bet, you can see what's going on. But in the non-sports content world or live content world, what's the kind of real-time data that we can use to enhance the experience and get more engagement, and have an impact on the churn and retention side? So more data from our perspective also obviously means more protection. I've listed three of the services that we are mostly working with our partners in OTT on today. App Shield, and code protection. These are really services that are about protecting more than the content. They are protecting the application from intrusion. They are protecting sensitive areas. And this is not something that's limited to video. For example, a lot of our customers are actually in banking or healthcare on that front, because there's a lot of sensitive data. However, to avoid leakage, revenue leakage on the OTT or on the content side, those technologies have great value, beyond just protecting the content, but even just shielding the environment in which the consumer goes and enjoys that content. And obviously our multi-DRM solution. And from all of these services, we export real-time data. So we make real-time data available to our customers, to really understand the customer. I'd love to have conversations with the audience or other folks on the event today, around what kind of data you're using, and also what kind of data we can actually bring to the table to help keep those customers engaged and reactivate them. All right, and with that, I want to thank everybody and hand it back to you, Steve.
Awesome, Sebastian. Great presentation. Really appreciate it. We have about 10 minutes here, so if you don't mind, we'll field some questions from our audience. I got a couple myself here. Let's start with this one from the audience. Obviously, you touched on it, content, the old phrase, content is king. That's what keeps consumers engaged, and in a lot of cases retained, and helps, temper churn some. But obviously that's against a backdrop of there's more content available than ever before, which is a great thing, right? Freedom of choice, but also leads to incredible frustration for consumers and how to discover content. And because of that, they do a lot of hopping between services, as Liam touched on and you kind of touched on. So how do we solve that? What are the biggest challenges with the whole content discovery piece and letting consumers know about content? How does that play into this whole churn and retention discussion?
Yeah, we see that too, and it's actually with every new service that's going out there, the problem is being compounded and really increased. I think we've seen, I don't know how many new service launches over the last 12 months. There was quite a few. Yeah. So we kind of believe that there will be this notion of this new super aggregator emerging in the market. That is, you're already kind of seeing it if you look at like Amazon Prime channels, for example.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a pay TV operator that's re-aggregating that content. But really, the nice part about that is, for that super aggregator, is that from the consumer side, the value that they're bringing is this single billing relationship and not having to keep track. Like I said, I think we're on average subscribed to 5 or more services now, and that's a lot of managing. I think you see banking apps coming up with subscription management tools, be it for video or any other subscription that you have. So I think some of that momentum, we'll see these super aggregators emerge. I'm not going to say that it's only going to be the Amazons or the Netflixes or so on. I think there are some pretty cutting edge telcos that are kind of going into that same direction that we're seeing and that we're partnering with, and that are giving us some interesting requirements around content production. But that's kind of where I see that headed, and hopefully that'll solve or add more value to the consumer and solve that fragmented discovery experience that we're seeing today.
Yeah, really interesting. You mentioned aggregators. We have a whole session coming on later this year as part of our virtual series on aggregation. There's so many different facets of it, and all does tie in to trying to help consumers with content discovery. And there's this push and pull between the Amazon channels of the world, right? The aggregators and the services themselves. Some want to participate, some don't want to give up their data or give up revenue. And it's really interesting dynamic there. And we'll see how it kind of plays out moving forward. We have another question, and I know we're going to get deep into this in our next session on data and decision making, but someone is asking about, can you help define what AI means from your perspective? Because it's a term that everyone, not only in OTT, but in all different industries on the data side, is throwing out there. and they're asking what is actually happening with AI and how its impact on making data smarter and the impact on trying to help churn. So if you can kind of address that, that would be great.
Yeah,
it's a hot topic, obviously.
It is a hot topic. From my perspective, I actually, what in the opening segment, Matt was talking about this a little bit too, and that actually resonated very well to me. And sort of this simple definition, but yet powerful definition of AI, in my mind, is that it's really technology helping us to ask questions that we don't really know to ask or didn't think of asking. So it's really kind of, recognizing patterns that we don't necessarily, that don't come intuitively to us as humans, and really seeing trends in the data that we don't necessarily see, or really this notion of asking questions that we don't think to ask. I think is the power that AI and machine learning can provide.
Yeah, and I think in the OTT space, one of the direct use cases that we've seen already is exactly that, what we're talking about today, which is on retention and churn. Seems to be a very seamless way to integrate AI and ML into those decisions, and companies like yourself are helping service providers and others throughout the ecosystem kind of become smarter and more integrated with their customer base. So the whole premise kind of your presentation, really interesting angle that you took. Churn is such a negative connotation, right? Cancel, losing customers, losing revenue, all that. And you titled your presentation "Embracing Churn," right? That it's kind of, it's a part of the landscape, especially of OTT services. How do you kind of reconcile that point of view, which again, I think is a really interesting point of view, versus from a service provider standpoint? Well, first talk about subscription services, right? Where they count on that recurring monthly revenue, right? That fee, or sometimes annual fee, depending on how a customer pays. Reconciling, you're gonna have to lose a certain amount of customers against, losing that revenue. And then let's say on the ad-based side, right, where they depend on advertising dollars, when folks churn from those types of services, you're losing ad impressions and then obviously which affects ad revenue. So how do you kind of reconcile those two sides of it?
Yeah, I think that again, if we look at some metrics that are out there, acquisition versus retention, where I think I've seen some stats out there that acquisition is potentially 5 to 25 times more costly than retention. Wow. And I think that the reactivation, really continuing to nurture that relationship with the consumer, is somewhere in between, probably. It's not as costly to acquire somebody that has never heard of your service, or you're trying to really convince them with off-network ads and whatnot, social media, to go pull them into the service. Right. So I think I would reconcile that by there is a median between really spending on content, and maybe to some degree new interactive user experience and that type of investment to retain the consumer, to that some consumers have certain preference sets, understanding that preference set, investing in understanding that preference set, and that'll give you a good foundation to go bring that subscriber back when the time is right, because you have a new content deal coming through that is part of that genre or appeals to that audience. And then you can be much more targeted with your spend based on that data that you have about the subscriber. So you're firing a lot less blanks in that model, I would say. So that's, I think it's kind of a healthy medium. I think we have to embrace churn because it's inevitable. It happens, and I think most of the time it happens because of content or price sensitivity, some of those too. But this notion of not giving up the relationship with the customer, even if they technically quit the service, I think is super important to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fair to bring into the conversation, there are obviously different types of churn. I'm sure we'll get into it in some of our later discussions. There's obviously involuntary churn, and voluntary churn. Involuntary could be folks that don't have right credit card information on the subscription side, or haven't engaged with the service in several years. Netflix and others have kind of churned them out. That's because they're just not engaged with the service, but could potentially reignite that relationship. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. Just want to throw one question back out to you. Looking forward a couple years, we have a poll question related to this. So you mentioned all the services that have launched in the last couple of years: subscription, the explosion of ad-based services, transactional services. Maybe potentially we're seeing some thoughts of consolidation and so forth. So maybe the OTT service playing field is getting a little more stable. Maybe, of course, I predicted that in 2019, and that didn't necessarily happen. But so where do we kind of see churn going from here? Now that people have a pretty good idea of this, at least the major services, obviously always going to be of mid-size or smaller services. Where do you kind of see the churn rate and churn going from here in the OTT space?
Yeah, I think it could be really correlated to how many new services are we going to see coming to market. Sort of that speed of fragmentation versus that re-aggregation into these super aggregators that I was talking about earlier. And so I think if we observe that growth in the market, new services coming in, I think then we're going to see probably a little bit increasing churn rates. If the offering is becoming more and more fragmented, we're going to see consumers service hop, if you will, depending on where they're going to find that content. So I think that's kind of where I see this going. I also see in the churn measurement sort of arena, I can see AI and ML technologies growing a lot in that segment to help us manage that, and perhaps also some vendors maybe in that space that help us understand from an individual service provider standpoint, what does the migration pattern of the consumer look like across those services with data. So I think there's going to be a lot of momentum in that arena.
Yeah, absolutely. We have let's get to it real quick. We have under a minute. Unfortunately, our time has flown by here, Sebastian, but let's get to this last audience question on the impact that an aggregator, we're talking about some aggregators, can have on both acquisition of retention to individual services that are clients of theirs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I think some of the power that they have is obviously the billing relationship. So you have, and you can sort of churn within that too. If you look at Amazon Prime channels, for an example, you could subscribe to a channel and you watch what you want, and then you unsubscribe from that channel. But really, the aggregator itself doesn't lose lose the relationship with the customer. And so I think that's really one of the most powerful tools that they have. And I think that's also where the consumer can see the value in that, as opposed to, like I said earlier, tracking five video subscriptions, let alone all the other subscriptions that we have for storage, music, books, whatever it is. So it adds up. So I think that's really kind of the key advantage of the super aggregator that's perceived by consumers as hugely valuable.
Well, with that, unfortunately, that's going to have to put a bow on it. Our time has flown by, but Sebastian Braun from Verimatrix, thank you again for all your insights and perspectives, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me.
Take care. And after this very short break, we're going to be right back with Elizabeth Parks, President of Parks Associates, Executive Spotlight with Matt Smith from Symphony Media AI. Thank you.
The Connected Consumer Podcast.
Hi, my name is Rosie Alpino, and I'm one of the hosts for Parks Associates' new podcast, The Connected Consumer. This podcast is all about Parks Associates' data-driven market insights on emerging consumer technology products and services, featuring our talented analyst team and industry leaders bringing new and innovative products to the market. In this podcast, you'll get an inside look at the latest industry trends focused on the connected consumer, home automation and security, energy management, connected health, and independent living, and digital content and video services. In our very first episode, we will take a trip down memory lane through the history and evolution of Parks Associates. This year, Parks Associates is celebrating its 35th year in business and its 25th year hosting Connections, which is our signature event focused on the connected home.
The Connected Consumer Podcast.
And welcome back. My name is Elizabeth Parks, and I'm the president of Parks Associates. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really pleased to be able to have Matt Smith, the vice president of business development with Symphony Media AI, join us today to talk more about retention and churn in OTT. So that was an awesome presentation from Verimatrix and from Liam on the Parks Associates analyst team. Clearly, there is so much going on right now in the world of entertainment. Consumers are moving in and out of services, and our discussion with Matt today is really going to talk about some of these recent trends and the role that data can play in engaging consumers and reducing churn. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. We're glad to have you. And let's go ahead and start out with a quick introduction of yourself and Symphony Media AI.
Hi, good morning, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and glad you're here. I am Vice President of Business Development for our Media Engage product. Symphony Media is a 30-year-old company that is in the business of helping our media customers audit where they syndicate their content and where it plays, but also some very exciting new SaaS products that can look at agreements and revenue, be predictive about revenue, and to your point, really analyze the data feeds and help our customers understand what their audiences are doing with the content and help them predict and mitigate churn.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. And, you know, there's so much to talk about. We just released some research showing that now 76% of consumers were churning last year, and that's changed to 34%. So at the end of last year, there was a lot of in and out of services, but now consumers are 46% are adopting 4 or more services. That is a huge number of services adding on with service stacking. So let's talk about how COVID-19 has really changed the landscape. If you could give us in a few words what you think the impact of COVID-19 has had on the market.
2 key things, I'd say, churn and retention. And let me explain a little bit. Churn, we talk about the churn rate that you highlighted. It's roughly about 38%. It's a rising trend since 2018. You know, it's really everything that keeps our audience and our customers up for years, maybe even last night, because there are endless choices for non-committal customers. Keep in mind, customers are shopping for content, really, not a platform. It's the number one reason they cancel. When they're in that full screen experience, they can't remember if it's Hulu or Netflix or Discovery Plus that they're watching their content on, and they really don't care. They just want their favorite show or scary movie, whatever they're in the mood for. Secondly, there's a low barrier to sign up and the ease of cancellation. And the OTT providers know this, and it's why we're seeing more AVOD rather on the rise. They'd rather have a subscriber downgrade to an ad-supported product than to cancel completely. And then to quote your research, 1/4 of subscribers are hoppers. They switch between services and resubscribe multiple times. That's not a bad thing, by the way. It's a good thing, and we'll cover that in a few minutes here. And service hoppers are about 1/4 of viewers. So then let's talk about retention. It's really all about the content, right? So people are watching up to 2 hours of content a day in 2020 with really no end in sight, unless you get to the end of the day. The size of the libraries are important. The service stacking that you touched on is fueling growth. But really, where's the inflection point for today? Where's it going to end up? So case in point, from this year though, we see providers winning on content. So The Office, which had its finale in 2013, was the most watched show of 2020. But really, NBC and Netflix won on data, right? They knew what viewers wanted when we were all locked up at home, to touch on the COVID point. So who's retaining subscribers? Well, Netflix, Hulu, Paramount. What your research shows, some of those big, really conglomerates, Disney as well, they're leading the pack. Now, what I can offer the audience is that magic formula that they all use, but they're very tech savvy and they're using the data to pull those subscribers over or to weather that next storm. Lastly, I want to finish with a little bit more of your research that says that adoption rates have risen from 71% of broadband households in 2019, Q3 to be exact, to 78% in Q3 of this year. And then 1/3 of the broadband households have 4 or more services. So it's not necessarily good and bad, but we've got to look at this data, look at the trends, and help educate those who are providing these services and those of us who are helping them manage it.
Well, certainly there's a lot of discussion on embracing churn and being able to leverage the data that you're getting to help with that engagement and personalization strategies. So let's dive a little bit deeper into generational differences, and maybe you can share some of the things you're seeing about the consumer segments. Certainly the older generations have different behaviors with their video services than do younger generations, not only on the content side, but also the platform, the device that they're watching the service on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the D2C or direct-to-consumer businesses have been about acquisition recently. They want to bring in those subscribers regardless of age, really. And the focus is now changing to retention. They want to keep those subscribers watching that service. How do we keep the subscriber? How do we bring them back if they do leave after they've watched the show? So it's the notion of free subscriptions, with a new service. Back to the content, though, your research shows that 26% of those who cancel an OTT service report doing so because they finished watching the shows that they liked. So they went to the service, they watched a show, they binged it, or they paid for it for a month, and then they left. And the service providers are thinking beyond retention to lifetime value. They want to keep you around as long as they can, forever if they can. And now the consumers are going to churn once, twice, maybe 3 times in the same year on that same platform. How do we adapt? Like I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We've just got to think about how do we kind of plant that hook or that carrot out there to get that one subscriber to come back to watch something else. So they're using the learnings of churn to attract the right customers to begin with, and segmenting those audiences to learn who canceled, but also who stayed, and attract more of those customers. It's the example that we've talked about before, which is, a male viewer on HBO Max may have an affinity for Band of Brothers, but when they finish that show, they think, well, what else am I going to watch? So then you use the data to help inform those programming choices, so that when I log in, if that's me, I'm seeing other shows that are in that genre. Maybe it's The Wire, maybe it's Sopranos, that will resonate with me as a viewer, as opposed to putting something in front of me like Euphoria, which is a show that on that service, which is a fine service, that I don't identify with. So programming properly to those age groups and using the data to help inform that.
Sure, and looking back historically at the cable channels, they worked to bundle their services together and then give that offering to consumers, which helped create an ease of finding content. If somebody wants to watch the HGTV show, they may also be interested in a similar show. So are there any things that you can share on past content strategies that may be reappearing as we move forward in the world of OTT services?
Yeah, let's start with kind of that last point that I was just making, and it reminds me of that college broadcast course I took many years ago. I know, when I had hair. I'm kidding, but seriously, back then we learned about hammocking, which was an old broadcast term that said hit show at 8 p.m. or let's say Eastern time. Let's use an Eastern time example. Hit show at 8 p.m. Hit show at 10 p.m. So at 9 p.m. let's put the new show that can hopefully keep the audience throughout the night. And name your favorite show. It's probably done on your favorite network. Well, something similar is happening today with OTT services, which is them trying to put shows in front of you before you're finishing the show that you're watching. Or maybe even just when you log into the service, something that catches your eye. It's the same concept as the old broadcast hammocking. They want and they can use data. Data is the most powerful thing we have with these services. So we can use that data that we talked about just a minute ago to understand you're a male or a female, you're in a certain age strata. So we're going to put content in front of you that makes the most sense. And the way that we're doing that is we have more data than ever before to pull in, analyze, and apply AI and ML to. And we'll get to AI and ML here in a second. But to be more predictive and to help our customers understand how to program and what the audiences want to see or not see. So there's no more need to silo AVOD, PVOD, SVOD data. You can put it all in the same system and program the same way. You got to look at the customer historically too, and not just app behavior, content consumption, but payment history, social data. Right now we can hook into Twitter and things like that. And the output's more valuable, right? We can, like I said, we can provide predictive insight. Who's going to churn, when, and why? We have all the data to show us, and we can see a trend line or data that begins to surface that and show that trend. We can use some of that to stop the churn from happening. And then lastly, integration. What gets me and our customers most excited is what happens when we start layering all those findings. We can use a product to develop and learn from accounting that they'd never know what would happen if enterprise data were still dispersed across 15 different systems. Now everyone has access to the data and can work as a team to help build, manage, maintain systems, reduce churn, understand what the audience is doing.
Well, sure, no doubt the power of data is there in terms of being able to personalize offerings and understand, more specifically what consumers are doing as a segmentation or even individually looking at them. But let's turn a little bit and talk about the technology side. So we're hearing artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning. Those terms are being thrown around, all the time now within our industries. Can you share with our audience what those that technology term means for Symphony Media and the application that takes place with OTT services?
Sure. I'd start by saying the analysis is much more sophisticated. This is a really good thing. But understanding the difference in AI and ML is key. So industry specialized algorithms have been trained on media entertainment data sets either by your in-house team if you're running a service or out of the box, and they can speed the time to value. So unsupervised ML we touched on earlier in the video that you may have seen. That means detecting unknown correlations, right? So lots of important business questions we didn't know to think to ask or we didn't ask that the AI has, because of its understanding of all the data and how it's performing, things to ask. The analogy I make for folks is, you say, I'm gonna get more in shape, I'm gonna get buff. I'm gonna walk into this gym and there's 50 machines. Well, If you only know how to use 2 of them, you may not achieve your goal. Same thing applies to training an algorithm. So an algorithm by itself can't just be thrown into a data lake and you shouldn't expect to receive results back. You have to train it to understand and do things that you want it to do. And then it determines other things based on your criteria so that it can see anomalies, like when we mentioned in the subscription example. Unsupervised ML detects unknown correlations, right? There's lots of business operations, business questions rather, that we didn't think to ask. And then advanced segmentation. So not based on demographics, so for example, people who love horror movies or baby boomers, but factors that really correlate to revenue like churn risk and CLV. So when it comes to predicting churn, the first thing we look at is the AI versus the existing model. So for example, accuracy, the percentage of users with predicted high risk within a segment, say for a particular pricing tier per product, false positives or false negatives. Did the AI perform better? And then we look at things like ROI. How much revenue loss did we prevent, or how much revenue did we gain in terms of percentage and overall dollars with AI? And then we look at some interesting data points that most companies weren't tracking before. We look at distribution. So how does retention compare across audience segments like hoppers versus free trialists versus loyal viewers? Then we look at content ROI. How much revenue are you making per title in your library? We can do that using data. Maybe there's something that you should license if you own it, or absolutely renew it if you're licensing the content based on that data. And then lastly, anomalies. So properly trained ML can sniff out something that seems off, like what characteristics are recurring among the highest risk customers. Maybe it's a data point you weren't looking for, like unintentional churn due to credit card expirations, or correlated to the cancellation of a show that was popular with an audience. So again, the licensing thing, if that show goes away, you may see a percentage of churn rise because of that title going off your service.
And in that sort of use case you referenced with the ability to predict churn, is there then an action that is recommended or that the client side is taking as a direct result of having that information? And of course, that could apply to all sorts of the data that you're collecting.
Yeah, another good question. In one instance that I'll use, we found a negative correlation between the frequency of cancellation and churn risk. So the group that canceled and renewed the most was less likely to churn than those who canceled and renewed fewer times. So maybe there's a limit to that behavior in some cases. We're digging into it right now, but the subscriber that comes and goes, it looks like it might be related to what we would see in the cable universe, where the HBO subscriber would come and go based on a show coming and going from the service, right, to save themselves a few bucks. The other story that I love to share is about unsupervised ML. So we found a tiny fraction of subscribers, something like 0.1% that were on a free trial promotion with a particular service. The problem is nobody noticed that the promotion wasn't deactivated, but our AI did, and it flagged it and saved the customer about $1 million in potential revenue. So no human could have detected that, but the AI did. And now our client can automate the promotion dates to avoid losing more revenue in the future. So those are two examples.
Well, that's great. And certainly churn and moving in and out of the services just continues to be a really big issue that all the services are looking at. How do we keep the consumer engaged and keep them wanting to stick with the service? There's also that phenomenon of looking at the consumers who continue to subscribe to the pay TV service, and then they just keep adding on services. So technically their spend per month on entertainment continues to grow. Of course, there are some people cord cutting as well, and then potentially looking to just bundle services as their core way to get video. That really brings in the role of some of these tech giants coming into the mix. So Amazon and Apple have really been playing a big role really everywhere for consumers in their technology lives, everything from the smart home space to the entertainment space. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, what you think the impact is going to be in the very immediate near future, and then looking a little further ahead as a result of them being very involved right now.
Sure, it's a big, broad question and an exciting one. So, caveat though, I'm going to offer my opinion. This isn't necessarily Symphony Media AI, but I would say, as someone who's been in this space like you for a while, expect some of that consolidation to continue. I don't think we're done. I may be wrong, but Apple hasn't made a paradigm-shifting move, and many expect them to acquire a studio or service. Their devices are so prevalent. We talked earlier about licensing versus owning that content, and we've seen activity in the M&A space that kind of echoes that. So that's a close one to watch. And frankly, companies are being purchased based on their reach and, the more interestingly, their content libraries. So platforms are doing the math. Is it cheaper to produce content, license content, or outright buy a company that makes the best? Another thing I'd look at is we're working with finite demand where consumers only have a certain number of hours per week to consume TV because there's only so many hours in the day to watch. In 2020, we almost saw up to around 2 hours a day with OTT services here in the US. So more OTT providers are vying for the same number of potential customers. So the questions that arise for me are, how do I outsmart the competition? How do I best engage my audience? And toward what end? Is it more valuable for me to have 1 million AVOD subscribers for 6 months, or 6 million SVOD subscribers for a month? Should I buy, or should I license the content to keep them engaged? And how does customer one's needs differ from customer two's, even though they look demographically identical on paper? Right? These are perplexing questions, and sometimes the data can help answer the story. But every company has to ask themselves different questions, and within the same company, the questions that you've got to answer urgently change by the second. So, what's the sudden global event mean for the quality of service, right? We saw this yesterday with a bunch of websites going down. Same thing, same rules apply to subscription services. And really, it's the ability to answer the question of the moment that's going to determine who succeeds and who doesn't. And we've known this forever. Just take a look at the foresight of a company like Amazon versus the old corner department store, right? It's thinking 17 steps ahead of your competition. You can apply it to this space as well. So lastly, I'll say I always ask the question of our customers and our clients, how prepared are you? How good do you feel about your strategy and the data and how you're using it? To do your job differently today, to lead your team through this quarter, to keep your company on the map this year, are you prepared, and do you have the tools that you need? I can't tell you that, but the data sure can, to make sure you have the tools to listen to it.
Well, the question on build versus buy is a really big one, I think, for all of the players in the industry, and certainly those tech giants as well are going to continue being disruptive. It's a little bit like the wild, wild west of business models coming out. There are a lot of different things being offered to consumers. There is a lot for the consumer to figure out what they want to pay, what they want to watch, where they want to watch it, what they want to watch it on. And certainly the pandemic with the movie theaters is also creating all sorts of new dynamics in how movies are being released and the revenue models there. So I think we've all seen some of the news with AMC and their stock prices going up, which is great news for them. And also our data showing that about half of consumers really want to go to the movie theater to watch a movie. They don't necessarily want to sit on their couch and buy it, although there's a big segment that are doing that also. So there's just so many changes going on in the market that I think you're right. We're going to continue to see companies being acquired, new services being announced, and then those aggregators also playing an important role to, for the consumer in understanding, where to get content they want to watch. I want to remind our audience, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them in. But want to also just touch on those windowing challenges that we're seeing from the content providers, and see if we can go a little bit deeper there. So, there have been different announcements with Warner Media coming out and deciding how they're going to release their new films, and then going backwards on that, and then coming out with something different. So what do you think is going to happen maybe through the end of the year with some of these blockbuster movies, and how they will get released, and then how the consumer market will respond to that?
I think you make a good point. I think that there are a certain section of the audience that would like to sit on the couch and stream a big movie on their big screen if they have it. And there are some who like the popcorn in the lap and, sit in the chair or the recliner in the theater of your choice and watch that. I think that Jason Kilar was pretty honest about his decision after he made it, and saying that if he had it to do again, that he may have made a different decision. I think we're going to see a move back toward more traditional windowing, where we do have the tentpole blockbusters that absolutely are in the theater. I myself am looking forward to Top Gun Maverick, around the November timeframe. But I think that this is going to disrupt a little bit of that. I think maybe some of those movies that may not have done huge box office numbers might be more efficient to be offered either as part of a streaming service, or maybe as an add-on, very inexpensively, maybe for $2.99 or something. And I think it's going to vary by studio. You and I have talked about this, where the quote was that Jeff Bezos said that we're going to reimagine franchises, we're going to reimagine movie making. What does that mean relative to what Amazon's going to do with MGM? I mean, now buying that studio, they own lots of television shows, they own lots of movies, some huge franchises like the James Bond franchise. So, what does that mean for James Bond? I mean, maybe reimagining it means that more content comes out. It seems like we get a Bond film every 4 or 5 years. Maybe it's more frequent because they do the research. And again, I'm going to say the same data for the 17th time. Maybe the data shows that we want to see more James Bond. We'd like to see more of those. I think Disney's really embraced that strategy with their, with the Marvel and the DC Comics thing. People have said, we're clamoring for more superhero content. Please put it out there. So, it reminds me too of what Mark Cuban tried to do years ago after Yahoo bought broadcast.com, and he and Todd Wagner said, we're going to compress movie windows. We own Magnolia Theaters. We own the picture company. We own the network and HDNet. And they said, we're going to release everything day and date. Well, it went over, like a lead anvil, if you will. But again, I'm dating myself. That was, 15, 20 years ago. So now it's a different time, and it's very viable to do this. So I think I think we're going to see some changes for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. This past weekend, my kids wanted to see Cruella. So the option was get it off of Disney Plus, which we already have, for an additional $30 to get that transaction and then own it, or go to the theater. And so I took 5 kids to the theater, and I think I spent $100. And I don't own the movie. So, it's an interesting model there, where I think the content providers are really going to look at, where are we making more money, or we add these together. I mean, now there's really the option. And I can tell you hands down, my children wanted to go to the theater. That is a different experience being there. We're also going to see further impact, even just looking at the size of televisions that consumers buy. So we, of course, track TV purchases, and consumers are buying bigger and bigger TVs, because they maybe want that sort of theater experience in their home. Just like when they're looking at leasing a new apartment, now they're taking into consideration, does it have an office in the apartment? Which most apartments might not have had a separate office space, but given the work from home move that is happened and maybe staying around for a lot of businesses, consumers are looking at their environments in a different way and purchasing different things, or looking for a different environment to watch or office out of. So it's really interesting. We have just one final moment here for you to give us a prediction of where you think things are headed. It's a bright future for OTT services, lots of disruption, but disruption always means opportunity. So would love to hear your last thought on retention and engagement with consumers.
Sure. I think even this audience, who I'm sure is savvy and very well read, would be surprised to know that there are more than 200 D2C OTT services in North America alone. So we've talked about the big ones and their strategies, and they're the Goliaths, and how important data is to them. But again, believe it or not, there's 190 other services out there. Whether you like Bollywood content, whether you like yoga and you need a specialized yoga service, and the price points can be very effective. There's just a plethora of that content out there. So I think the choice, if you're a subscriber, a consumer, a viewer, the choice is infinite. The amount of content you can get is incredible. And again, at price points that you'd be surprised about. The challenge for them is different than the big guys that we've talked about. There is so much data that is part of these services that some of these entities are equipped to provide. They have teams, or they leverage companies like Symphony Media AI. And there are others where they just say, we love offering the service. We have very loyal subscribers, but it's painful for us just to understand everything because we just don't have the wherewithal to do it. From the payment information to the playback information to authentication, to even to try to predict their revenue, it just flies by them, and they're just treading to stay above water. So I think choice will continue to be almost infinite. I think we're still going to see consolidation. I think we're going to learn more about churning subscribers, and it not necessarily being a bad thing. That it's almost a subset of churn. How do we wrangle the customer who comes and goes effectively? So, and then what that means is, if I'm a programmer, I want to send very, very prescriptive messages to Matt Smith and Elizabeth Parks relative to what they've watched on my service and relative to their genre and the things that they like. So instead of just the blanket approach, say, hey, by the way, did you know the Friends reunion's on my service? And I'm not picking on anyone in particular. So, instant thought. But effectively marketing to those audiences to acquire them, but then to also market well to I'm struggling to come up with a good term for this, but the churning customer who returns, the come and go customer maybe. So those are some of the things I think we'll see in the near future.
Well, thank you for that last thought. I love that the choice is infinite, and certainly it's our job in the industry to make it very easy for consumers to find what they want to watch and then be able to watch it. So Matt, I want to thank you so much for your time today and joining our Future of Video event. So thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. And next up, we have an awesome session that is featuring Plex, TiVo, BitMovein, Real Good, and Zumo. So just hold on for a second. We'll be right back. Thanks for being here. I do have a question from the audience. How do you see working with utilities as a channel to increase smart home adoption?
Got the panel's perspective, the builder's perspective. Now let's see what the audience was thinking. How big a challenge is interoperability?
Someone submitted a question. What does it take for managed Wi-Fi services?
I'd like to divert from my next question to kind of cut to one of our audience questions. What type of content do you feel most likely to drive MVPD subscription and retention?
We did have a question in from our audience though, so let me jump over here real quick. Have you or are you thinking about solutions around employee privacy?
We have a lot of questions coming in. I kind of want to dovetail on one of them. Can you talk about how you kind of view the pay TV business model?
Just a reminder to our attendees, you are able to ask questions in the live discussion button, which you bring up the panel, and there's a Q&A tab.
The Connected Consumer Podcast.
So could you talk more about Park's position in the market and the value it brings to the industry?
Sure. So, over time, our research and events practice has really grown slowly, but we have kept a very specialized focus on the consumer and emerging technologies, and specifically looking at the intersection of different technologies in the home and the opportunities it provides. Trisha Parks, my mom, founded the company 35 years ago, and has very much focused in on developing research reports, primary studies, doing lots of custom work, strategic consulting, executive conferences, and really with the goal to help provide companies with the best data and insights for them to understand the growth and the purchase intentions, consumer sentiment about new and emerging technologies in the home.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for our interactive panel. I want to thank again Matt Smith from Symphony Media AI and Elizabeth Parks for moderating that great discussion. Kind of sets the table for our panel, which is going to be all about effective strategies to help you in the service space, the OTT video space, or other aspects of the digital media space, help and retain your customers, that's what it's all about. So that's what we're talking about today. And lucky for me, I don't have to go about it alone. We have a great panel. There we go. A little trouble with the slides there. Sorry about that. Great panel of industry experts. We're going to go one by one and introducing them. We have industry experts from Plex, TiVo, BitMove, RealGood, and Zumo joining me today. And again, I'm Steve Nason, Research Director at Parks Associates, and I will be moderating the panel today. Before I introduce our illustrious panel, I want to remind you of a couple things. First of all, any questions you have for any of us on the panel, please submit those, and we'll get to as many of those throughout our hour together as possible. And also, we have 2 poll questions related to retention and churn that we would love for you to be able to respond to, and we'll get thoughts of our panel as well on those as we move along. So let's go ahead and introduce each of our panelists. First, we have Scott Hancock from VP of Marketing at Plex. Welcome, Scott. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Plex. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for having me. My name is Scott Hancock, and I run marketing here at Plex. And for those of you who may not know who we are, we're an independent global streaming platform that provides AVOD and live TV content along with podcasts and personal media and more. We're essentially a group of international media and tech nerds with a passion to make the best user experience and assemble a diverse community of like-minded enthusiasts. We've been around since about 2009, and we've got still about 25 million or so registered users across the globe. And we're now one of the most widely available aggregators of both AVOD and live TV content in about, 190 countries or so. So great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott, for that overview. And yeah, we mostly been focusing on the subscription side of things, but we have Scott and Stefan from the ad-based side as well. We're going to hear all about how they kind of define and churn and retention. Thanks again, Scott. Next, we have John Haim, Senior Director, Product Management from TiVo. Welcome, John.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So yeah, my name's John Haim, and I head up product management for what we call our discovery platform within TiVo. And what that platform is, it's a collection of 4 products that cooperate to create personalized experiences that retain and engage end users. And those 4 products are comprised of search recommendations, so a personalization engine so that we can give personalized search results and recommendations to end users. We have a product called Conversation Services, which is a natural language understanding product that adds the voice modality to a customer's experience. We have advanced metadata, so not just understanding things like title, genre, and simplistic metadata like that, but the underlying moods, tones, and themes to be able to glean relationships between different pieces of content. And then finally, our analytics platform, Insight. which gives us all the data to try and fuel these other products and complete the experience.
Great. Really appreciate that, John. Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about here and in our next section, kind of the intersection of data and kind of the video service provider side of things and how data is becoming smarter. We've already talked about that some with Sebastian and Matt. And yeah, we look forward to all your perspectives, John. Thanks again. Next, we have Igor Oriper, VP of Solutions at BitMovin. Welcome, Igor.
Hi, thanks for having me. So a little bit about myself and BitMovin. BitMovin, we provide a number of products to the video streaming industry, particularly for direct-to-consumer streaming for video services over the internet. And those products are an encoder, a player, and an analytics solution. Pretty straightforward. We're a software company, and we like to make the best tools possible out there in the industry to enable and shape the future of video. So for this session in particular, I think I'm probably going to talk a lot about the analytics product and how we use data to inform user experience or to help our customers inform user experience so they can make the best decisions to improve and optimize that user experience for their video services.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Igor, appreciate it. Look forward to hearing your perspectives. Next, we have David Sanderson, CEO at Real Good. How are we doing today, David?
Hey, good. So yeah, I'm David Sanderson, CEO of Real Good. We're a streaming service aggregator for consumers. So we put all of your streaming services into one place. I think not a new concept for anyone here. So we've got millions of users on our platform, and we're available across web, mobile, and TV. And then we also on the B2B side, what a lot of people don't know is that we actually license the data set that we've built to power Real Good. Basically, we have a really clean matched data set of the catalogs of all the streaming services. And then we license that. We're kind of behind the scenes for pretty much all the major search engines, set-top boxes, TV companies, telcos that are providing some sort of functionality around aggregation in this space. And then more recently, we've also had a lot of inbound and new customers that are the streaming services themselves and the studios that are looking to get the catalog information to understand kind of where they fit in the market and what the competitors are up to.
Yeah, you have some really fascinating data. We'll look to dive into that and get your insights from what your data kind of shows that's related to retention and churn. So really appreciate you joining us, David. And last but not least, we have Stefan Von Eggen, SVP, Content Programming and Acquisitions at Zumo. How are we doing today, Stefan?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Zumo, for those of you who don't know, is I guess what they would call a fast platform, but AVOD direct-to-consumer platform, all ad-supported, over 200 premium linear channels, as well as VOD, and natively built into smart TVs, as well as connected devices. We've been around since around 2015. And last year we were acquired by Comcast, and we continue on as Zumo. So happy to be here and talk about churn and retention.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Stefan. Once again, as a reminder, I have a couple of poll questions for you to answer, and also any questions you have of our panel, we'll sprinkle them in throughout the session. Definitely get to as many as possible, especially towards the end of our discussion. So I want to throw this question out there. I'm going to start with Scott, actually, to tee you up. We're going to get to everybody on this one, because I really want to get from your perspective over the last couple of years, including the impact of COVID. What are the trends that you and your organizations, both on the industry side and consumer side, have kind of really shaped retention and churn as it relates to OTT video? What are the trends that you've been watching and shape kind of your strategies around retention and churn? So Scott from Plex, let's start with you.
Sure. So as you can imagine, the stay-at-home orders have positively impacted our collective business for, I think, everybody on the call here. So I think from that perspective, it's a pretty easy answer there. I think in the terms of acquisition in particular, we've been able to acquire a number of new folks and, probably folks who may not have had the time or interest to pursue a streaming app, and now they are. And we're seeing an increase in folks who are cutting the cord and trying our new services out. So from an acquisition perspective, it's done really well. I think for those of us who are delivering AVOD content, the free ad-supported content, we've also seen an increase in retention. So those folks who have tried their services simply because the barrier of entry is so low for services like ourselves, we've seen the acquisition and retention rate go up considerably. I'm not so sure if that's the same for the SVOD partners, but I think they're probably seeing something similar. That and also the quality of the content overall has been improving so much for our collective platforms that folks are now, realizing that there's great content outside of their traditional cable box, and are giving these newfangled streaming apps a try and sticking with it. And we're seeing a pretty shift in the market overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to follow up a little bit on that, Scott, as far as COVID specifically. I know you kind of referenced it, but I'm assuming we've seen it in the whole ad-supported space, just a huge uptick in that, and greater engagement as folks were kind of stuck at home. And then we're kind of obviously, knock on wood, emerging from that kind of. Can you talk a little bit more about the COVID impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's here to stay, to be honest, the shift in the media viewing landscape. I think that the shift from watching traditional cable boxes over to streaming apps is here to stay. I think folks have, once they've given it a shot and, are less concerned about making that leap. There's a number of folks that we've seen who have tried and who are sticking with it. So I think while, there's going to be a lot of churn in our category, as I think Matt was mentioning previously, I think that the overall volume of folks who are coming into the streaming platform has increased so much that it's going to overwhelm sort of the churn rate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of going the other side of the table. Let's go to Igor next and kind of get your perspectives. Obviously, you work on behalf of clients, right? A lot of them being streaming service providers. Kind of talk about over the last couple of years, what trends have you have been tracking on the consumer and industry side related to retention and churn, kind of the problems you've been helping to try to solve, especially during COVID, for your clients in regards to that?
Yeah, the interesting thing that we've seen over the last 2-3 years is just the sheer proliferation of new services. We've seen a lot of new services come to market. A lot of them have been experiments. A lot have really tried different business models. They've iterated very quickly, much more so than I've seen in the past. And what's interesting is with the pandemic, that trend really continued. So we had even faster proliferation, introduction of new services. We've seen new customers come to BitMoveIn and say, hey, I really need to deploy. I've got a great business idea and I really need to deploy quickly. And they were able to get to market very quickly, try something out. If it didn't work, they pivot, they tried something else. And where it did work, they've focused on optimizing user experience to really try and attract more users to their platforms. And so that's been a really interesting trend. I think that'll probably continue, and to a large part, it's here to stay. I expect it'll probably decrease a bit with some of the restrictions getting lifted. Fewer consumers are looking for new services. They've found their favorite yoga SVOD service or their favorite exercise service. But there's definitely just a much higher number of services out there. And the services that are out there, they're really getting really good at using data to inform better viewer experience decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to dig into that, what kind of that data in the toolbox looks like in a little bit. So thank you for that perspective. Let's shift to John from TiVo. John, from your perspective, what have kind of been the trends that you and the customers and markets you serve, what have you kind of been looking at the last couple of years, especially with this huge impact of COVID, as it relates to retention and churn?
Yeah, specific to COVID, I'll preface my answer with, I'm speaking from the perspective of my customers. So when people think of TiVo, they think of the DVR.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing. At least not what I'm doing. So we're powering other customers' experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Two things that we've noticed. One is there's an increased variability in sub counts and churn. So as people have more time on their hands, they try new services, sub count goes up, trial ends, lots of people churn out, right? So much more volatility in that respect. Maybe not a terribly bad thing, because part of the trial, the purpose of the trial is to get people exposed to the service, right? But that's one thing we've noticed. The second thing we've noticed is, and I think one of the other panelists mentioned this earlier, pre-COVID, for the most part, people had a time constraint on how much TV they could watch, right? So you had this situation where for a lot of people, they probably had a really good idea, hey, I have an hour to kill. I'm going to go watch this show. I watch it and I'm done. Now, with that constraint lifted and people have all this time on their hands now, personalization has become much more important. So that when somebody gets on your service or your platform, watches that first show, and now they find themselves with more time on their hands, now what? You got to be front and center with the specific thing that they want to watch next, or they bail out and they go watch somewhere else. So personalization has become much, much more relevant as these services compete to keep people within their environment.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole personalization we touched on at the beginning in our discussion with Sebastian about content discovery tools, and we're at a great time, but also a frustrating time for consumers because we have more content available than any time in the history of video, but there's also probably like never before customer friction and frustration in trying to find that content, right? And what content they want to watch. And we've talked about it through our research, kind of hopping between services to find that content. So yeah, personalization as part of like a, content discovery toolbox, really, really important. It's become so much more important. Appreciate that, John. Let's shift to David. David, more on the data side. What are the trends that you kind of been following, both from your subscriber consumers that subscribe to your service, and you're able to track all the types of different content consumption in the OTT space, and also on the B2B side with your clients, what the trends they're kind of been following the last couple of years, and especially the impact of COVID.
Sure, yeah. So on the consumer side, I mean, at least from what we've seen on our platform is much like the others here, a lot more viewing happened, a huge spike once the lockdown orders went into effect. And then what's been surprising is we thought as the world started to come back online, there would be a pretty significant, the drop would be as steep as it was when it went upwards. But it's actually, we've been surprised. There's been a little bit of a dip, but it's actually relatively held. And I mean, I think that's a combination of things. I think people have just sort of made a greater part of their day entertainment viewing. They've just gotten used to that during the COVID lockdown days. And the other is I think a lot of people are getting to work from home now, and that cuts commute time, which ultimately means, at the end of the day, instead of spending, call it 45 minutes getting home, that's additional time that they have to watch TV at the end of the day. So we're definitely seeing more, from our platform, we're seeing more titles viewed on a nightly basis than we did in the pre-COVID days. And then on the retention side of things, obviously there's been a number of major new services entering the space, and we call them internally must-have services. The likes of like Disney and Peacock and others, where it has the major titles that pretty much everyone wants to watch and are in the zeitgeist. So with that, we've seen the average number of streaming services that people have increase, and then I think that's those have some built-in retention to them. I mean, one, they have these services have flagship titles that are good for bringing people in the door, but then they've also been very strategic in pulling kind of the titles that would keep people watching. So the likes how HBO Max took Friends and Peacock took The Office away from the other services. So they've kind of kept those must-watch titles in their catalog, and I think that's been critical to retention, and I think they knew that and saw that coming. But then beyond that, I think we've seen that people are getting pretty saturated in the number of titles. Or number of services rather that they're subscribing to. There was kind of a peak, but we do see that generally seems to tap out around 5 or 6, which is usually a combo of the major services and then sometimes some niche services. And then the last thing I'll say on all this is I think that what we're seeing the streaming services do is kind of two things for retention. One, we're seeing more and more they are trying to promote themselves off their platform. I think before it used to be all about like recommendations, as John said, those are absolutely critical, having those nailing that on your platform. But then they're realizing that people aren't always coming to their platform every night, that they need to be visible and have awareness outside of their platform to bring people back in. So we've seen an increasing amount of that, as well as on the data side. Definitely, things are getting more competitive. They really want to understand what their competitors' catalogs look like, how that's evolving, what they're investing in, what they're divesting in, what lanes, the content types should they be focusing on, and what should they be moving away from.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer and really great perspective. Yeah, you kind of talked about tentpole programming versus programming like library content or catalog content. It's sometimes called to keep them engaged. That's a big impetus. Amazon, when they just recently purchased MGM, they came out just out and said, we bought it for the IP. We want to be able to take these franchises and build off of them and keep people engaged with their video services by purchasing that content. And of course, Stefan and in the ad-based space and so forth, they're all looking at original exclusive content to retain and engage customers too, as well. And Scott's with Plex as well. So to wrap up this part, Stefan, I want to get your kind of perspectives from Xumo's perspective over the last couple of years, especially since this during this unprecedented time over the last year or so. What kind of trends from a consumer and industry side have you kind of been looking at? And what have you kind of seen out in the industry related to retention and churn?
So the problem with going last when there's a panel of really smart people is that they've all said really great things that also apply to what we're seeing in the ad-supported space. But I'll try to add a few things here. I think everybody talks about the sort of stay-at-home orders, kind of increasing hours of viewership, and certainly we saw that at Xumo as well. I think I would add a caveat that it was also an incredible year of an incredible news cycle. And on the free side, the news cycle, whether it was COVID updates, political updates, whatever it may have been, drove a lot of new users to seek out services and information where they could. And so on the free side, you also have major broadcasters that participate in that direct-to-consumer ad-supported space, so NBC News Now, for example, or ABC News Live. And so therefore there was an information and a service to people over the last year that drove a lot of new users in. Now what we saw coming out of that is not a decline or dip, but actually a change of viewing habits where, it may have been around 80% news consumption for new users through 2020. It actually switched to more entertainment based towards the end of that and has continued that way. Where news has sort of balanced out with some of the entertainment viewing. So I think the good news is they didn't just disappear once the news cycle ended. They just found other stuff they like. And I think on the free side, there's always room in a consumer's media consumption wallet for free. So as you talk about churn outside of 5 major SVODs or whatever it may be, there's always this glue and stickiness on the ad-supported side that can kind of fill in the gaps and then sort of become that daily habit. Certainly at Xumo with the linear play out and linearization, sort of fast platform mentality, it becomes a lean back, easy to use, easy to be your friend kind of service, which also helps with retention.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. By the way, you did a great job, even though I picked on you last. I think you said something that no one else did. So I'm going to come to you first next. So we don't have to worry about that, but really appreciate that perspective. Before we move on, kind of the next question, we did get a question in about personalization. So I'm actually going to throw this one to John, since we kind of mentioned this one, and anyone else can chime in. And I'll paraphrase here a little bit. With credentialing, which I believe they mean the account setup and the ability to have multiple users, right, sharing one account and multiple profiles, which a lot of the services had. How does this affect personalization to the experience and keep engagement and recommendations for retention? So I guess what they're kind of asking is, you have different users, all different recommendations. How do you keep the whole engaged and retain them as a household, as a subscribing household?
Yeah, so one of the key things that we're working on in that space is being contextually aware. What I mean by that is, like you said, maybe there's a given user using the system, and like you're familiar with Netflix, it asks who's watching, I click John, and okay, now I get my personalized recommendations. But how can we know who's using the system without actually overtly asking someone that they're using the system? So for example, if somebody triggers a voice interaction with the system, can I glean that this is user A in that household? And so I should tailor my response accordingly. That's something that we actually have available today that we're able to do. Now, obviously, you need to balance all the privacy aspect of that as well. So being able to be contextually aware to deliver that hyper-personalized experience, but still respecting end user privacy. There's countless other contextual factors that can be used to do the same thing. Maybe potentially understanding how many people are in the room, so that maybe you're the one that's actually asking for something, but if I know your daughter's in the room, I'm going to tailor that response differently. So that's the key thing that we're focused on going forward, is how do we make this system more contextually aware to meet end user expectations that are increasing over time for the system to be more intelligent and more personalized for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Or
yeah, I got one thing. We internally talk about we call it water cooler content. So in the pre-COVID days, it was, what is the content that you and your friend group is watching, and surfacing that information to users is important, because they want to keep up and be part of the conversation when they get to the office that day or when they're seeing their friends. Now, obviously, the water cooler has changed a bit to the household. But I do think there's an opportunity for streaming services to, it's critical that they have these separate profiles, but they can also share some of that information. So show that if your wife and your kids are potentially watching a certain title, surfacing that if it's a title that may also be kind of a recommended title for you, because then if it's something that gets the family talking about that title, there's a much higher chance that they're going to follow through with that series and obviously retain longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just to chime in on that, that's a great point, David. Like, it's even if you nail the recommendation and it's personalized and it's what the user wanted, I think it's always better to come from a trusted friend or someone as opposed to a faceless algorithm, right? So I think that's a really key point.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Keep the questions coming. That was a great one. That sparks a great discussion here. I want to switch gears, and as promised, I'm going to start with Stefan here, then go to Scott, and then Igor will get on this one. I'm really, really interested, especially the two of you on the ad-based side. We measure churn a certain way. We currently do it typically for subscription-based services, right? We ask consumers which services they currently subscribe to, which ones they've canceled in the last 12 months, and then do a formula to kind of figure out an annual churn rate from that. We've seen Sebastian presents a monthly churn information. We've seen the services themselves kind of measure churn certain ways and retention. So really get curious to get your opinion. Again, Stefan, then Scott, then Igor. How do you each kind of define retention and churn? What are the key metrics, KPIs that you're tracking in order to, and obviously will be completely different on the ad-based side. So that's really why I want to kind of dig in with Stefan and Scott, and then get Igor more on the data side. So Stefan, you kind of start us off on that. How do you kind of define it?
Yeah, and I don't think it's that much different than a subscription service in terms of user, not user, right? I mean, we're still tracking the return user cohorts, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and the KPI there is just how often can we get them to return, and how and when they come back, what's the time spent, right? So making sure that return users are finding stuff to the personalization standpoint, or from the premium content standpoint, that increases their likelihood of doubling their session times or visit times, right? So it's time watched, it's return user cohorts, and then in addition, we're also looking at sort of how they track through the system, right? So it's that sort of thing that I mentioned, if they came into news and ended up in entertainment, is it better to start in entertainment? Is it better to start in news? And starting to build that sort of stickier mousetrap so that you can kind of keep people flowing in. I think to Scott's earlier point, the audiences are growing at such rapid rates that we're also looking at sort of what can we do for new users. I think I've heard in the past, Hulu, I think mentioned a long time ago, if anybody spends more than 30 seconds browsing, they've lost them for the next 3 months or something like that. I don't quote me on that one, but it's all about on the new user side, can we get them to stay longer than 30 seconds with their initial interaction from a new user standpoint in the platform.
Interesting. Scott, how about your thoughts on that? How do you guys at Plex kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. I think the economics here are pretty straightforward. I think for us, it's about engagement. How do we drive folks, not only the new folks, but also returning folks in to stay on the platform for as long as possible, whether it's to watch, AVOD content or perhaps a fast channel or even a podcast or something, some other media that we provide. And we're fortunate enough to be in a position to where we can offer up a variety of content so that we can keep them perhaps engaged a bit longer than a kind of a single pipe. And for us, it's time on platform, time on site, as well as returning customers as primary KPIs around that.
Interesting.
They vary a bit by segment, but overall, it's pretty straightforward.
Sure. And Igor, on behalf of your clients, what are the metrics that kind of make up how you track retention and churn?
Sure. Yeah, it varies a little bit the way that our clients use our analytics product for between subscription and ad-supported content. There's obviously the audience engagement metrics, as Scott said. Well, back it up a second, right? There's kind of two parts of metrics. There's the app or website metrics. So from the moment that a user enters the app, maybe before they're authenticated, after they're authenticated, you're sort of tracking the experience of that user. And then once the user engages with content, that's the second set of metrics. And so from our perspective, I can talk to the second part of those metrics where we're helping our clients track the engagement with the content. And usually that's measured in terms of plays, successful plays, play attempts, unique users. So they're, sometimes they're able to feed in unique user IDs so that we can sort of track a user in an anonymous way across multiple video titles. So we can tell that, the same user watched 3 or 4 different video titles. Here's how long they watched those video titles for. So there's that part of the metric. Then there's for advertising, you're really interested in how are they engaging with the advertising of the service? What are completion rates? What are click-through rates? How often are you able to play ads successfully and have confidence that somebody actually watched those ads? And then what did they do after? What happened before? So the granularity of the engagement with the content as well as the ad content is really critical for ad-supported platforms like Zumo, for example. And then there's also quality of experience metrics that drive retention and churn. So you can tell, kind of from a technical operations perspective, it's very easy to tell when a user has had a good experience watching, one title out of 10 or 10 out of 10 or 0 out of 10. And when they had a bad experience, what did that look like? Was it buffering? Were they not able to scale up the screen to sort of the full potential of their device? So it's, there's the quality of experience metrics as well that I think play a lot into, is that user going to come back? Did they abandon the session? How many sessions did they abandon out of play attempts? And so there's a lot of granularity now that you can glean from these user experiences. And I think what's most interesting from my perspective is not just the sort of, the complexity of it and how much of it you can track, but you can track it consistently across different platforms and devices. Things are the things you look for might be different, but the data that you get can be very consistent across devices, which helps to inform future decisions you make, not just in terms of the content, how you tailor content presentation on different devices, but also what content do users watch on which devices, right? Like that's an important question. There's a lot of obscurity that we find kind of digging through mounds of data that you just wouldn't think you might find. Going back to Matt's comments earlier from Symphony AI, they're just questions we don't think to ask until the data is there and you have ideas from maybe a machine learning algorithm to ask certain questions.
Steve, I would chime in here that Igor is exactly right on the user experience, and lots of times you think about user experience and you're talking about, does it play? Is there errors? Did you find what you want to find? But from the content perspective and being the programming person, certainly in the ad-supported space, it's about this up-leveling of premium content, right? So in Zumo's case, adding lots of studio movies or having sort of premium news channels from media partners and that sort of thing. And I think, we heard in one of the earlier sessions about SVOD sort of seeking out a specific title and sort of, trying the trial or subscribing for a specific marketed title. In the AVOD, you have a much more likelihood of somebody passing by or grazing through. And so that premium nature of what they experience there is even that much more important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Igor, that's really interesting. You bring up kind of crossing the QoE, the quality of experience, those kind of metrics, which you may not think of as much with looking at kind of retention and churn patterns. Really, really interesting stuff there. David, John, do you have anything to add as far as the metrics that you're tracking that's related to retention and churn?
I mean, our metrics are very simple when it comes to when we're looking at the streaming services, because we simply see, when people first sign up for or just even use Real Good, they enter what services they have, and then we see if they add them or remove services as they, over time with our product. So we just simply see, do they have the service? Do they not? Now, obviously, on our platform, we look at retention in a different way, which is just how often are people using us after their first initial use. Pretty classic consumer product retention. But one thing that we've seen with the streaming services is what they're becoming aware of is that basically they need to catch people before they cancel, because if they're at the cancel stage, it's obviously too late. So we've seen that they're trying to understand when someone is likely to churn. So aka they haven't been active for a while. That actually empowers them, those users, using that information to understand that, hey, these are people we need to go after to re-engage, which kind of goes back to something I mentioned before, the off-platform promotion is becoming more and more critical to the services. Because as it stands right now, if they take a platform-only approach, it becomes all or nothing, which is basically people are watching stuff on their platform. Hopefully they're doing a good job doing recommendations. But if that person leaves and there's another streaming services, there's no real way for them to re-engage that user. And I mean, we've seen that in our marketing relationships with the streaming services, where previously, like I say, last year, the focus was more around just driving new subscribers through Real Good. Whereas now we're seeing a very marked shift to where a lot of the focus is going to promotions around retaining their existing customers.
Interesting. John, you have anything to add and kind of wrap up this part of the discussion?
Yeah, on that note, we at TiVo, we focus primarily on two aspects of churn. One is what I would call content-based churn. So what are people watching on your service? And then what do they leave your service to watch? So just as a hypothetical example, let's say somebody's on Peacock, right? And they watch Brave New World. Well, what if we find out that of those people that watch Brave New World, 28% of them end up on Prime to watch Tales from the Loop? What could Peacock do with that information? Well, maybe using the advanced metadata, they could identify items in their catalog that are similar to Tales from the Loop and keep that end user within their experience before they go out of the experience, right?
Right.
Or if they find out they have a content gap, that's something they can address going forward. The second aspect of churn that we look at is what we call behavioral. So some of the factors that some of the other panelists have already mentioned, things like, for example, weekend viewership is one. There's one customer we had where we did a churn analysis, and what we do is we come up with a predictive churn score for every one of the end users. And this is based on various behavioral factors. Could be weekday watching, click conversions, time watched, weekend watching. And by knowing that, you can take a look at the set of customers that are most likely to churn and target specific actions towards them. And David kind of alluded to this in his response. But for example, if I find out that I have a contingency of users that has high churn risk because they don't watch on weekends very much, then I could potentially bias my recommendations while still keeping them relevant to surface weekend content to try and change that behavior before they churn out. So those are the two aspects that we're primarily focused on.
Awesome. Yeah, really interesting stuff there, John. Appreciate that. We had a couple of questions come in that I want to get to. I think, David, I'm going to throw this first one at you, since you look at a lot at the program level, kind of fluctuations in viewership and so forth. So someone had a question. They were asking specifically about Disney Premium Access, which I believe came up in Matt's session as well, where they kind of added on a transactional arm for some of their new theatrical releases. Mulan was the first one they did that. They've had sort of interesting results, but it's basically that whole concept of driving someone and trying to retain them and having them stay with the service with this one title, right? And in this case, having to subscribe first and then pay an additional fee, and kind of how that relates to retention and churn. Obviously, some other services, HBO Max, obviously made a big splash by premiering all their Warner Brothers films on HBO Max for 30 days. You know, they had some wonderful success around Christmas with Wonder Woman, but then saw some churn from that. We saw it with Hamilton and Disney Plus last year, huge spike in signups and then a huge drop off in churn. So kind of talk about all that and how effective kind of a retention and acquisition tool that is.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of seeing that the jury's still out on that front. There are two ways of skinning the same cat effectively, where I think when they try to do the $30 for the movie, part of it is kind of a short-term money, like not money grab, but it's a bit of a short-term goal, with the secondary goal being get people retained, which is then obviously, as many of us have said, where recommendations becomes critical, because if you like that, finding similar movies. But it's a bit more of a in and out, obviously, transaction for the user, and retention, it feels secondary in that situation. Whereas what HBO Max has been doing of getting people in, and then if they're already subscribed, even if it's for that month, without having the data to back this up, but just kind of at a gut level from what we're seeing, that feels like a better approach, because then they can seamlessly now watch other content on the platform. As well as obviously the lifetime value of those users is greater. So my best guess is that we'll see less of the sort of Mulan style releases and more of the Wonder Woman type releases. And I think that the services will just try and improve their recommendations on the things that they do to make sure that they can grab the user after they watch that title. And I think that with time they'll get there. I think they'll do a better and better job of that. I think we're seeing greater churn after a Wonder Woman than we otherwise would see, because their hand was kind of forced by COVID, where they had to move quickly in figuring out that approach. But I think they're going to be more and more conscious about the retention after those titles, and we'll see an improvement over time.
Yeah, and of course, Warner Media, while they're still just Warner Media before they merge with Discovery, it's already announced in 2022 they're kind of going to split their strategy. Blockbusters will see a theatrical release, and then it'll go through a shortened window. So then the other half of their releases will go straight to HBO Max. So they're kind of hedging their bets, and I agree with you totally. The jury's still out on that. This question is perfect. I may not have worded it exactly like this, but we have a audience member out there is asking if anyone from the panel is willing to share any of their colossal failures. So I'm going to spin that question around a little bit to say, you got to talk about some of the strategies, retention and churn strategies that have worked, and maybe ones that haven't worked so well, or the ones you're still trying to figure out the impact of. Let's start with Scott on that one.
Of course. So I'm trying to come up with a good example of one that didn't work so well. Off the top of my head, I can only point to perhaps, from our perspective, because we're an AVOD provider, sometimes we'll lean in on a specific title, so a single title specific promotion or communication or something along those lines that just in our head and in the data that we had, it would suggest that it's going to be a blockbuster for this particular segment, and it perhaps was a dud. I think we've run into that a couple of times, and thank God we're not an SVOD company, because boy, there'd be a lot riding on that. So fortunately, we have a broad, breadth of offerings, and the catalog's pretty deep. So it's less single title specific. And to David's point, as he's talking about the Wonder Woman releases and such, if we had put so much money behind that one particular title, that'd be heads rolling. So that's one example I can come up with that's wasn't so great. I can tell you right now, the things that we're doing that seem to show some promise is communications really around demonstrating breadth, demonstrating that not only do we have this particular title, but we have a number of titles that are similar. Come check it out. It's those types of communications that seem to be resonating the most with folks at the current moment. So don't know if that answers the question, but
no, absolutely.
That's what
Stefan, you want to chime in there? Is there others?
Yeah, I was worried that the viewer question was about our own personal colossal failures, which we would need a whole nother session.
Oh, I got time for that.
That's it. That's different. That's a different thing. No, I would say, I don't know about colossal failure, but learning would be more the interesting learning would be the phrase I would use on something specifically. Q4 is always a really big quarter for advertising, digital advertising, and then obviously from a content perspective, you can really dial in sort of editorial tent poles around holidays and that sort of thing. And this last year, with a few specific titles tied to holidays and Christmas, I extended the window into January, thinking everybody's at home, maybe they want to hold on to the holidays a little bit longer. And the drop off after about January 6th was something to make me reconsider my career of editorial and programming. But it was worth trying for January. But so from a learning perspective, there are windows on this content, right? That works from a calendar perspective, from an audience perspective. I would say, as you look at sort of some of the trends and some of the stuff that is helping across that board in a similar nature of Hollywood holiday movies in December, is if you see a lot of these AVOD fast platforms doing sort of single series channels, right? That's where the sort of trend has gone, and it's for that very specific reason that we're talking about churn and retention, which is people want to know what they're getting, they want to know what they're watching. They see the Deal or No Deal channel, they go, that's going to be a game show called Deal or No Deal, I bet, and I feel like that, and I'm going to watch that, and it helps that retention because they know exactly what they're getting. Whereas, maybe an upstart brand or rebrand of an aggregated channel has a harder time from a marketing perspective. So yeah, it's sort of learnings across the content space.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a couple of minutes left. This time has flown by. I really appreciate everyone's perspective. I'd be remiss if we didn't get to the results from our poll questions and get any quick thoughts on those from our panel. The first question was, from your perspective, what is the most challenging phase in the OTT customer journey? When I've asked this question in prior events, usually acquisition wins out, but it's between acquisition, engagement, and retention, and it's fairly close. 31% say acquisition is the most challenging, 31% also say engagement is the most challenging, and 38% say retention. Any thoughts from anyone on those three, customer acquisition, engagement, retention? What is the most challenging? Any quick thoughts on that one?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's our
All
answer.
the above? Yeah.
E.
All right.
But no, from our perspective, I think once we have, once we have a customer, and so long as we can give them a good experience, they tend to stick around. Again, they're not paying us, so it's a little bit easier on the AVOD side.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's about that full. Sorry, John. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, if I was forced to choose, I'd probably say engagement, since that's a prerequisite to retention.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I was just going to say it kind of goes around in a circle, right? The challenge is getting them there, and then the challenge is making sure they stay there a long time, and then the challenge is getting them back. So it just keeps moving depending on where you are in the life cycle of the customer.
Awesome. All right, and then our second question leads into our last general question for the day. It's kind of the evolution. Where do we see churn and retention and OTT going from here? So our poll question related to that was, in 2 years, the overall churn rate for OTT services will A, increase, B, decrease, or C, stay about the same. Our own data that we shared recently from our first quarter survey showed that the churn rates of subscription services, including vMVPDs, went down. And with vMVPDs down pretty considerably, and kind of opine that it could be due to kind of the market is stabilizing as far as the number of large services out there. People are starting to really understand what they want in their stack. They've had plenty of time to try out these services. But it looks like 69% disagree with me. 69% say it's going to increase over the next 2 years. So I want to throw this out there to each of you. We're going to start with Igor. Well, first of all, you can comment on where you see kind of churn going from here. Just the next couple of years, how do you kind of see churn and retention evolving in OTT?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been on a change trajectory of media consumption for many years now, and it's already changed a lot. I think it's been changing even faster over the last 3 years, and again over the last 1 year. And I think it's going to continue to change even faster. As I said earlier, we're still seeing a lot of experimentation. We're seeing newcomers launch new services very fast. We see those services get shut down very fast, but also we see a number of those stay and become very successful, against what many have thought would happen. And so, churn or retention rates are really, it's a matter of math, right? So I think I don't see them increasing substantially. Right? It might look like they're increasing because you see so many people moving from service to service, but we're also seeing that consumers are comfortable using multiple services at the same time, as long as they have a good way to discover content across those services. So I think the advent of sort of universal search and recommendations, some of the content deals we're seeing that allow users to search for content across services really make it easier for consumers to subscribe to many or continue watching lots of AVOD services. So it's, tough, of course, to predict. I don't see it really increasing substantially. I think it probably stays about the same. But the number of services, I think, will continue to change.
Great. David, your final thoughts and kind of how we spin this forward in evolution of retention and churn in OTT?
Sure. I mean, I could speak a little more specifically to the SVOD world for this one. I think what we're going to see is, as was just mentioned, there's going to be more and more services popping up, but I think those smaller services the competition's getting fiercer. So those smaller services are going to experience higher churn, and the must-have services will start to experience slower churn. As just people, have sort of their base services. And then I think as a result, as we're already seeing, a lot of those small services are going to get gobbled up by the bigger must-have services.
Interesting. And John, your final thoughts on kind of how we spin forward retention and churn.
Yeah, I'm on the fence on whether it'll increase or decrease. And the reason for that is, on the one hand, different people have cited different metrics about how many services people have, 4 or 5. It's actually 6.8 based on our research. But the point is, people have a lot of services, right? So it's easy to churn out because, so what? Like, I only lose 15 to 20% of my available content. Whereas back in the day, if I churned out, I guess I had to read a book or something, right? Because it was all one guy. So, from that perspective, it's so much easier to churn. But at the same time, the tools available to providers to mitigate that churn are as powerful as they've ever been. So, I don't know which way it would go, because they're better able to deal with it these days. I just think they're going to have to focus on it for sure.
Absolutely. And Stefan, your final thoughts.
I think it depends how you define churn at the sort of app level or at the sort of company level. As the sort of consolidation happens, right? As Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus get bundled together, right? Sort of use of the app or still being subscribed to the bundle of apps, Discovery Plus joining forces with HBO Max and CNN Plus and some sports SVOD or something. All of a sudden you have these bundled companies where maybe you're not using Discovery Plus, but you're now using HBO Max, but you still have everything, right? So I think it's sort of, if you're talking about usage versus actual monetization and subscription, I think churn could be sort of defined as they're still paying me whether they open it or not. And that's sort of the more of the trend that I see happening from a company and consolidation level. On the AVOD side, I think you're going to see differentiation in the content, right? Roku channel buying Quibi and rebranding it Roku Originals, and maybe looking into that IMDb announcing originals and that sort of thing. And I think that you're going to start to see differentiation in the AVOD. And from that standpoint, I think there's not really a churn aspect, because it's all free and people bounce and use it and will pick it the way they've been picking, Netflix versus Prime up to this point.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely an explosion of original content in your space. And Scott, I'll give you the final word today on where you kind of see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, these guys nailed it basically, but the idea of as apps and these service providers becoming what used to be channels in the old days, I think we're going to see just a greater consolidation of these in a way that we haven't seen yet. I think we're going to see a blend of these SVOD, AVOD, TVOD services, combining into a more cohesive delivery, and no one knows exactly what that's going to look like just yet. But I think to David's point, you've got the tier 1 guys, and those tier 1 guys are going to probably just get stronger over time, and it's going to be just a battle. And the tier 2s and 3s just below that, and they're gonna have to do something. They're collectively gonna have to do some bundling and some smart services in order to combat that churn.
Absolutely, and that will put a bow on it. I want to thank Scott again from Plex, John from TiVo, Igor from BitMovin, David from Real Good, and Stefan from Zumo. Thank you so much for your time and perspectives today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just some reminders here. All our speakers and everyone can stick around. We're going to go right to a Zoom networking discussion. The link to the chat, the discussion with our speakers, as well as folks from Parks Associates and our audience, is in the chat window. Also in that chat window is a link to a roadmap planning survey that Parks Associates has put out, try to get at with folks in the industry, such as everyone in the audience today. What topics are important to you? What topics would you like to see us cover on the research side? Within entertainment, we also cover the smart home space extensively. We'd love for you to fill out that survey, and the link is in the chat window as well. Following the network discussion, we get right back at it at 2 p.m. Central Time. My colleague Paul Erickson will lead our discussion, very near and dear to a lot of folks on the panel, data and decision making and video services, and we hope you could join us in about 40 minutes for that. Again, we want to thank our sponsors, Everise, Symphony Media AI, Delta Tray, Brightco, Future Today, BitMovin, and Metrological. Thank you again for your support. And as a reminder, again, this is the latest in our virtual series for Future of Video 2021, culminating on our 2-day event in the middle of December, all about the OTT, pay TV, video service, digital media space. As a reminder, Parks Associates offers the OTT Video Market Tracker service. It's an exhaustive analysis of market trends and profiles of OTT services in North America. We offer a quarterly service update that includes profiles as well as subscriber and user estimates, and also a monthly supplement market updates on the latest developments in the OTT space. And finally, for any research questions or needs, please contact Jason Paris, VP of Business Development. He can help you with all your connected entertainment needs, be it syndicated or custom. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you in our Zoom networking discussion, and then back at it at 2 o'clock Central Time for our data and decision making and video services session. Thanks again.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Capice, and I am a Strategic Account Manager for Parks Associates Executive Conferences and Custom Marketing Services. First, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting our event today. Your combined and individual support helps make our events possible. As you may know, Parks Associates is a woman-owned and trusted market research firm with an excellent reputation for our research and executive conferences. While 2020 is a year that we will certainly never forget, it remains our goal in 2021 to serve and support our sponsors through our year-long virtual conferences and custom marketing services. Our conferences offer a unique combination of industry expertise and extensive consumer research and analysis, ensuring sponsors visibility to the right audience of our senior executives throughout the year. Connections, the premier connected home conference, is celebrating its 25th year and hosting more than 1,300 senior executives from the smart home, security, connected health, energy, and home automation industries during sessions throughout the year. Our 12th annual Smart Energy Summit addresses the evolution of the customer utility market, the impact of COVID-19, and new opportunities to drive engagement in utility-sponsored programs and energy-efficient solutions. Parks Associates' 8th annual Connected Health Summit addresses opportunities for connected health solutions to empower consumers, caregivers, and providers to meet the growing demand, independent living, chronic care management, remote access, and wellness and fitness solutions. Our 4th annual Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and Digital Media brings together senior leaders to share insights on consumer adoption, churn, and spending on services, including the role of the connected CE in the growth of video viewing. If you are looking for new ways to engage with our audiences, increase your brand awareness, and network with our industry leaders, I would love to share with you on how to partner with Parks Associates to help provide your brand more visibility.